The hidden legacy. The deepest scars in American history aren't always found on battlefields or written into treaties. Some are hidden quietly, buried not in the soil, but in our very DNA. Across the United States today, millions of people discover unexpected traces of Native ancestry in their genetic tests. More often than not, the name that surfaces in family whispers, hidden records, or genetic markers is the same: Cherokee. But this isn't just about heritage. It's about a civilization deliberately dismantled, families forced to forget who they were, and descendants left with only fragments, an unexplained surname, a faded photograph, or a small percentage on a DNA report. The story of the Cherokee people is not simply one of removal. It is the story of how a great nation, sophisticated, democratic, and deeply spiritual, was fractured through policies of erasure so profound that today, many who carry Cherokee blood don't even know it. This is America's darkest DNA secret, a living legacy of survival hidden inside millions of people, yet separated from its cultural roots by centuries of silence. Cherokee civilization before erasure. By the early 19th century, the Cherokee Nation had achieved something extraordinary. They had built a constitutional democracy modeled in part on European systems, complete with courts, elected officials, and a written constitution. They established schools where literacy rates rivaled and sometimes exceeded those of surrounding states. They printed their own newspaper in both English and the Cherokee syllabary created by Sequoyah, proving that their culture was not only vibrant, but adaptable, capable of thriving in a world of rapid change. Cherokee farmers cultivated productive fields, traders established strong markets, and artisans carried forward traditions of pottery, weaving, and carving. Cherokee towns grew into centers of political and cultural life, where public buildings, ceremonial grounds, and communal spaces reflected a vision of permanence and order. They were not nomadic wanderers. They were a nation, sophisticated in their governance, advanced in their agriculture, and deeply rooted in the southeastern woodlands they had called home for centuries. But this success created tension. In a rapidly expanding United States hungry for land, Cherokee prosperity became an obstacle. Their flourishing farms and orderly towns contradicted stereotypes of native primitiveness. Their ability to coexist and even outcompete in some areas of education and politics unsettled neighboring settlers and politicians. The Cherokee, by thriving, proved that the American narrative of inevitable domination was not as inevitable as many wanted to believe. So began a slow but deliberate campaign, not just to move the Cherokee from their lands, but to dismantle their identity at its very foundation. Laws were passed to undermine their sovereignty. Treaties were signed and broken, and eventually, entire families were forced into silence. The Trail of Tears and the Silent Transformation. The most infamous chapter in Cherokee history, the Trail of Tears, was not an isolated event. It was the culmination of decades of pressure, broken promises, and calculated removal. In the early 1830s, under Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act, entire Cherokee families were rounded up from their homes. They were forced to march westward across hundreds of miles to what would become Oklahoma. Thousands perished from hunger, exposure, and disease. Children and the elderly collapsed on the roadsides, never to rise again. The very name Trail of Tears captures only a fraction of the suffering endured. Yet removal was only part of the tragedy. What came after was quieter but no less devastating. Once in Oklahoma, the Cherokee faced relentless efforts to strip away the foundation of their culture. Children were taken from their families and placed into government and missionary boarding schools. There, they were beaten for speaking their own language, forced to abandon their traditions, and taught to despise their heritage. The goal was simple: erase the Cherokee identity from within. For many families, the only path to survival was silence. Parents stopped teaching their children Cherokee words. Grandparents no longer shared sacred stories. Heritage was buried under layers of fear. The result was generations of descendants who carried Cherokee blood but had no knowledge of Cherokee ways. A cultural void opened up, a silence that still echoes in countless families across America today.
Ancient origins and hidden sophistication. For centuries, American history books painted native nations as primitive or transient, as if their civilizations were destined to fade. But archaeology tells a very different story. The Cherokee were heirs to civilizations far older and more advanced than most accounts admit. Their ancestors were tied to the great mound-building cultures, the Hopewell and Mississippian peoples, who created monumental earthworks, developed astronomy-based calendars, and established vast trade networks that span the continent. By the time Europeans arrived, the Cherokee had already developed a complex clan-based society. Their agricultural techniques were advanced, their governance sophisticated, and their ceremonial practices deeply woven into cycles of the earth. Cherokee towns were permanent cities with defensive palisades, council houses, plazas, and spiritual centers. Some towns held thousands of residents and served as hubs of commerce and diplomacy. They were not wanderers living on the margins of history. They were stewards of their land, scientists of the natural world, and visionaries of social organization. Their civilization was built not on domination of the environment, but on balance with it, a principle that shaped their farming, hunting, and ceremonial life. This deep history matters because it proves that what was lost was not simply land, but entire systems of knowledge. When forced assimilation stripped the Cherokee of language and tradition, it severed connections to wisdom refined over thousands of years. The genetic puzzle. Today, DNA testing has opened a new chapter in the Cherokee story. Millions of Americans take genetic tests, hoping to uncover hidden ancestry. Many are shocked when Cherokee lineage surfaces in their results, or when it doesn't appear at all, despite family stories that insist otherwise. The reason lies in the complexity of Cherokee genetics. Maternal lineages passed through mitochondrial DNA show some of the classic Native American haplogroups, A, B, C, D, and X. But unlike many other tribes, the Cherokee also display unusual frequencies of haplogroups like T and U, more often found in Europe and the Middle East. On the paternal side, the picture is equally complex. Haplogroup Q, common among Native Americans, is present, but often overshadowed by haplogroup R, widespread in Europe. Some researchers argue these patterns come from centuries of intermarriage with Europeans and Africans after colonization. Others believe the diversity suggests ancient migrations long before Columbus set sail. Either way, the outcome is the same. Cherokee DNA doesn't fit neatly into the categories used by commercial testing companies. Algorithms designed to identify Native American ancestry often miss the unique signatures of Cherokee genetics. This leaves countless people with Cherokee roots holding test results that deny their heritage. This is America's darkest DNA secret, an entire nation hidden in plain sight, erased not by bloodlines, but by the limitations of science and the politics of recognition. Resistance and survival. The Cherokee were not passive victims of history. For over a century, they resisted removal, fought wars, and defended their sovereignty with brilliance and courage. Leaders like Dragon Canoe earned reputations as fierce strategists, capable of defeating much larger militia forces through ambushes and mountain warfare. Settlers called him the Savage Napoleon, a title that betrayed both fear and respect. Cherokee resistance was multi-generational. They built alliances with neighboring tribes, staged coordinated campaigns, and fought for their lands long after many believed the struggle was over. Even when defeat seemed certain, they found ways to adapt, regroup, and endure. Survival also took quieter forms. Artistry and pottery, basketry and mask making carried spiritual meaning even when words were forbidden. Rituals like the morning immersion in rivers, going to water, persisted as acts of spiritual renewal. Families whispered fragments of language, preserved stories in secret, and held on to identity even when it was dangerous to do so. The Cherokee people endured because resistance was not only about battles. It was about refusing to let their culture vanish, even if it had to go underground. America's darkest DNA secret. Today, the Cherokee Nation survives as a sovereign people in Oklahoma and North Carolina. Their language, though endangered, is being revived through urgent educational programs. Their art continues to thrive, and their spiritual practices are remembered and renewed. But the larger truth remains. Millions of Americans carry Cherokee ancestry without knowing it. They are the descendants of silence. Families who hid their identity to survive or who lost their heritage in the machinery of assimilation. For them, a DNA test may be the first whisper of a story that was never told. America's darkest DNA secret is not that the Cherokee disappeared. It is that they were hidden, pushed underground by policies of erasure, and buried beneath layers of shame and silence. Their blood never vanished. It flows through countless families, often unrecognized, but always present. The Cherokee story is not just one of tragedy. It is one of survival against impossible odds. It is a reminder that identity, even when suppressed, finds ways to endure, sometimes quietly, sometimes invisibly, but always alive. The task now is not only to acknowledge that survival, but to give it voice. The Cherokee deserve more than survival. They deserve recognition, respect, and the restoration of the dignity that was denied them for centuries. Every DNA result that hints at Cherokee ancestry is not just a statistic. It is a reminder of resilience, of voices that refuse to be silenced forever. It is proof that even in the face of erasure, the Cherokee live on. This is America's darkest DNA secret, and it is also its greatest lesson. That survival, though costly, is possible, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to rise.